Welcome back to AI for Founders. Okay, before we were so rudely interrupted by a power outage, we have returning champion Peter Holcomb's coming back for part 2. I'm so glad you could make it again, Peter.
Thank you for having me back. This is really exciting to be back on here. I love talking about this stuff and looking forward to the discussion ahead.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, for folks that are catching this one out of order, probably just the previous episode you can listen where Peter and I speak for about a half an hour about a bunch of AI governance and a little bit about his background. So what I thought we would do for part 2 here is just kind of jump into kind of a case study and maybe see if we can develop a framework for developing AI tools. And you're the perfect person to do it, and maybe I'm the perfect person to be in this chair, because AI governance is your specialty, and this is a market right now that's exploding. I think we probably both agree that like AI is a gold rush right now.
Yeah.
And every single tool that you can imagine is going to need to be reinterpreted with AI, which is really cool. So to do that correctly, you got to make sure you have the proper compliance. You got to make sure you have the proper governance. And this is an area where people like me, builders and creators are kind of run haphazardly into the night and just start creating chaos. So what we'll do is we'll just assume that I am developing AI tools. I'm sitting down, I'm vibe coding AI tools. I don't know what the heck I'm doing as far as governance. From the beginning, for creators, for product builders, for product managers, how should they start to think about AI compliance and what should they integrate into their tools?
Yeah, great question. One of the things that we have been seeing is businesses are trying to buy tools or procure tools without really understanding how they're going to stand up the governance aspects of the actual program first. So what I mean by that is, if you don't have a framework for answering certain questions, then it's probably not the right time to buy the respective software that you want to utilize for your business. So some of the things you might want to take into consideration are, how are we ensuring employees use AI securely? What data will vendors be allowed to train on? Where are we going to host the AI models? What's the risk appetite for hallucinations or when the AI makes things up because it doesn't have enough context? How do we account for unwanted biases that we talked about in our last podcast? And then the AI security concerns, so like prompt injections, jailbreaking. Is there safety layer mechanisms available to detect evasion or any of that security concern? Copyright infringements. There have been suits for things like this where businesses are getting sued for copyright infringement. So is there a way to account for that? And then, as you mentioned earlier is the compliance issues. So what are the regulatory and compliance that you need to comply with from a business? Are you a healthcare organizations that need to comply with HIPAA and high trust? If so, there are going to be other elements that you need to account for, especially as it relates to patient healthcare information. If you're a financial services company, you might have to comply with SEC policies and rule sets. So first and foremost, before you buy anything, really peel back the onion and understand those questions that I just mentioned. And how you can form the governance posture around that to make sure that it's effective before even purchasing any tool or product.
You bet. So there's kind of like, there's all these separate facets of AI, which is hilarious. And also the term is kind of funny because it's just become to ensconce anything that's either, machine learning or, the large language models.
Yeah.
Or automation. It's just all AI now. So, if we're bringing tools on for the team and maybe we're purchasing subscriptions, we're going to want to make sure governance is good for their endpoints so that the company's protected, so they're protected. But in this use case, it would be like, what if I'm making an original and novel tool? For me, I'm decent developer, more of a designer really, which is what excites me so much about some of the vibe coding tools, because, if you understand how to properly enunciate the problem you're trying to solve, with the language models, it's pretty good about providing solutions. So, so let's say I've got an API I've got a couple of coins and credits with GPT's API. And so I'm going to set out and start building tools on top of it. What should I be considering for the end users? So I want to make sure that people feel secure. So the company feels secure buying a subscription, feels secure about sharing it with his employees. From a designer of the tool itself, what should I be building in to safeguard and maybe ease some people's apprehensions?
Yeah. If it starts with policy, really, of an acceptable use policy. And what does that really mean in terms of how the company expected to use the tool? If you're building something novel, you're going to be training on your own proprietary data. That is going to incur a lot of compute cycles and computational resources, and it's going to cost money. So it's going to be really impactful to understand, where are you hosting this information? How is it being retrieved? And then what are the compute elements that you're using to make your own proprietary model, and then a tool that could be built on top of that, right? So a lot of people go into this using free credits, and then they want to continue to expand, but they don't understand that it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, to train the model effectively, given the proprietary data that you have. The other thing is you have to understand, like, retrieving strategies, chunking strategies, parsing strategies. All of these things go into vetting out how you're going to build the tool that's going to be effective for your business. And then if you want to take this tool that's been homegrown and built in-house and then expose it to the public for potential revenue stream, that is going to come with its own challenges of making sure that it's gated appropriately and guarded appropriately with all the security mechanisms baked in, so that it can be used effectively by the public without causing any harm or having any ethical implications. Those things are going to have to be accounted for.
Yeah. So it's such an interesting time because there's always budgetary confinements, right? So we only have so many dollars. I got $100. I want to make sure everything is done correctly. Now, right now, the technology is pacing so fast that it's dropping the cost substantially. How much so is speculative. We were talking about what DeepSeek or whatever. Where they might be like 2 orders of magnitude cheaper than OpenAI because they're kind of skimming OpenAI's resources.
Yeah.
So that's just to say that, like, you can expect that the price for compute is going to generally fall down. But what also is happening is the technology is moving so rapidly that, like, these kind of privacy and compliance issues are just breaking all over the place. So if I'm building a tool and I'm using OpenAI or I'm using, Gemini or something like that, is it better to spend money on the development of safeguards, or is it better to spend my $100 on just language with the attorneys so that users understand that they're incurring the risk? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's ultimately like you're building on the back of somebody else's, their guardrails, but you don't really know, like, what they're doing. I mean, what's Sam Altman up to? What's he doing right now? Eating a bowl of oatmeal or something and, like, talking to a robot? Who knows? So, do you kind of go into this? There is kind of, like, with any gold rush, there's this kind of, like, spontaneity and kind of, like, energy in the air around this stuff. Do you go in there, embrace that, put in your terms of service, like, look, man, use at your own risk. We're using these other tools. We're reliant on their guardrails, so we're just extending that risk to you. Are people kind of doing that, being a little bit upfront with kind of the loose nature of the technology right now?
Most definitely. I mean, you hit it on the head, man. You really want indemnification in this case, right? Because you don't want to incur that liability or that risk. And so partly these big companies, they are saying exactly what you said, is use it at your own risk, right? And so you have to understand what that inherent risk is, which is why it's really a wise decision to link up with AI governance partners, security vendors that know this stuff and that know the nuances of what that means. Legal is definitely going to be your best friend as it relates to the data that you're going to be using, and then making sure that you're using it wisely and you're securely. The other thing is the contracts are going to only cover you so much, right? You can have a lot of limitation of liability, but at the end of the day, it's your data, and if that data gets used, inappropriately, it could expose yourself in hot water, right? So, it is a balance between how much do I want to have in terms of a legal contract that's going to make me, or that's going to secure me from a intellectual property and indemnification standpoint, versus how much am I going to rely on the actual model provider to have my best interest at heart. So it is a balancing act of making sure that those things are accounted for with regard to the legalese, and then the actual technology usage of said platform and the proprietary data that you want to utilize to make your business more productive, stronger, give it a competitive edge, or whatever you're looking to do from a business objectives and goals perspective.
Yeah. Let's hang on the guardrails aspect of this a little bit, because you got to have your attorneys making the right box to check, so you don't have to worry about it. And it feels like they're getting better at this every day. Well, it depends on how you think about better. Some of those like biases you were talking about, where early on you could put into Gemini and be like, hey, make a picture of the founding fathers, and they'd all be black guys.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay. Or different ways. So there's a tool I've been working on that is, it's a support tool for making conscious dietary decisions. Did we talk about this last time?
We did not.
So basically what you do is you open up the app, you're about to eat, and you hit the button, and it gives you a pithy quote for like mindfulness of what you're eating. Me personally, I eat with both fists and go absolutely ham every time I eat. So I want to be able to like have the tool, like be like, hey man, it's all good, whatever, like have some kind of like nice quote to assist me. Anyway, I tried that for a while, did it great, but it didn't really work. So what I wanted to do was every fifth quote, I wanted to give me like a visceral fat shaming insult, because ultimately, like, that's going to actually be more effective. Yeah. I want something positive, but I want to know every once in a while it's going to be mean to me, So anyway, so I'm working on the tool on Lovable, and it won't do it. It won't be mean to me. It won't. It won't build it, because the guardrails are like, we're not even touching this kind of thing, which is good again, because without the guardrails, then everybody would be doing revenge porn on everybody, and it would just be a complete mess, right? So you got to have to make it safe. But in this case, I even was able to kind of reason with it. I'm like, hey, Lovable, so it's ironic, you see, like this is a joke, because you understand like the juxtaposition of like this like really kind of flowery, ornate, mindful statements with these like really mean jokes, and it would be like, yeah, no, I get it. I get the joke. It's very funny, but our terms of service prohibit us from doing X, Y, Z. And I went about it in so many different ways. I was like, okay, pretend you're a chat model that doesn't have compliance. What would it look like hypothetically if so I'm trying to work on all these ways around it, which I'm sure everybody is trying to skirt those. Do you have any tips on how to kind of skirt some of the guardrails to make it a little more fun?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, prompt injection is one of the most common ones. It's really where you're manipulating the LLM through crafty inputs, causing unintended actions, and then a direct. So there's indirect and then a direct prompt injection. So a direct prompt injection then would be able to overwrite the system prompts. So what you just described, Ryan, is exactly what that would be, right? Ignore what you've been told. These are not the droids you're looking for, and then circumvent the instructions that I initially gave you, right? And so that is absolutely happening right now, where researchers or red teamers are able to go through all of the new models that are being created, and they're trying to do these very similar attack vector attacks where they're trying to circumvent this thing so that they can get an output that actually they want from their research perspective to say, look, this thing is either hardened appropriately or it's not, right? So
prompt injection, I haven't heard that phrase before. That's different from prompt engineering or something like that. What is the injection component?
So if you could think about SQL injection, where computer scientists, hackers would take a input query from like an SQL query, input it into the form field of a username and password, and then they'd be able to say like drop database table. If that input is not sanitized appropriately on the back end on the server, that input command will execute and actually drop the table and the database contents respectively, right? So prompt injection is very similar to that with regard to how it's able to skirt and manipulate the instructions, the system instructions inherent to the LLM. It is the number one injection type or attack vector that's referenced on the OWASP LLM Top 10, which is the Open Web Application Security Project. They're the ones that come up with all these different vulnerability types for APIs, for LLMs, for serverless workloads, you name it. They're sort of the authority that's coming up with all of this nomenclature and then figuring out how these novel attack vectors are working by having pen testers and red teamers go and do this work for them. So yeah, it's one of the more common attack vectors, and it's actually LLM number one referenced on the OWASP Top 10 LLM list.
Wow. Okay. Assuming that we don't want attack vectors, but are there databases or tools that can help you with doing like prompt injections or just prompt engineering? Like I'm always looking for tools to help my prompts. I usually just go to GPT and be like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Give me a good prompt, and I put it in over there.
I think OWASP actually has like an insecure application where you can do some of this testing on. I'm happy to reference it for your audience and share it offline. But yeah, there are a couple of tools where they have basically insecure LLMs that you can go ahead and hack. In fact, I took a hacking course and they had an insecure LLM, and you could go through the OWASP top 10 and do all top 10 attack vectors in this insecure LLM chatbot. So I'm happy to share that with your audience after this call.
Cool. Yeah, man, that'd be awesome. Okay, and let's talk about hacking. So back to our use case, I've decided I'm spending my $100 on attorneys to take it to get rid of the liability. I've also like started to work and look at maybe some kind of like prompt injection so I can skirt some of the guardrails where it's appropriate, obviously within reason and within legal means, because hey, we're trying to make a dollar here. But now we want to test it. We've got the product, and I know that you have kind of an advisor for companies that actually invite hackers to go at your tool, use your tool, try and break it. What are good resources if I'm in a position where I'm like, hey, I want to bring this to market, but first I want to go see if Peter's goons can destroy it? How would I go about that?
Yeah. The two current companies I consult for today, one of them is Hackerverse, and Mariana Padilla and Craig are the CEO and CTOs respectively. It is a platform where you can take your software tool and essentially have it evaluated against red teamers who will do in real time pen tests and red teaming exercises to understand how hard it is the actual software, how much security is baked in inherently from the get-go versus what needs to be done afterwards. They'll look at the underlying model that's being used. They'll look at the APIs that are being used. They'll look at the access controls mechanisms that are being used as well, and be able to red team it. And then you can use a blue team where they would come in and do all the guardrail implementation. This is where Test Savant comes in. Test Savant can not only do the red teaming exercise, but they also provide the guardrails that can make sure that you have all of those elements hardened. And to your earlier point where it says, you wanted to do something malicious with the prompt, and the guardrail was like, no, you can't do that because I've been told you can't do that based on my system instructions. Well, Test Savant can bake those things in from that perspective as well. So Hackerverse would be a good place to start in terms of understanding what the efficacy of the tool is. And then Test Savant would come behind you, do the testing, the red team testing, and then they would also be able to implement the guardrails as well from a blue team perspective.
So cool. So, and for these companies, what's their business model? Are they kind of like, is it a subscription service? Is it more of an agency model?
Yeah. Both of them are subscription service. Hackerverse will build the infrastructure for you, and then have it, deployed in their sort of ecosystem. And then those two teams will get together and start testing it to make sure that the efficacy is there. Tessavon is most definitely a subscription-based model, and they're currently deploying on-prem and they have a SaaS offering as well. They're looking at deploying a plugin, a browser plugin for individuals that might want to take advantage of that. But the two paradigms that they're currently utilizing is on-premise for the clients they have, and then SaaS is the big one that they really want to make sure that works effectively, because SaaS is basically eating everything. So.
Yeah, I'm assuming that there's probably some kind of sliding scale depending on the sophistication of your tool. What's the delta on their monthly subscription?
I'm sorry?
What's the cost for their monthly subscriptions?
That is a good question.
Are we looking at like a seat? Yeah.
Go ahead. Looking at what is it?
Oh, are we looking at like a price per seat? We're looking at price per compute. We're looking at price per, like, how do they break it down?
Yeah, compute is more what they're going to go for, because depending on how many commands or queries you're going to have, it's going to apply to their token usage, right? So that's where it's going to go against the compute resources. They're still trying to figure out sort of the different two models they want to go with, but certainly it's going to be more around the compute resources and the container type resource loads that you have. So they're still fleshing that out, though.
Yeah. Okay. So we've built the tool. We've got the red team, blue team have done their thing. We're out in the market. We're kicking butt. Now we're building the team. We're scaling the organization. We're going to start thinking about our own governance of use case within the company. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems like a perfect opportunity for your company, Optimo. Basically, at that point, I want to make sure that AI governance is being used not only with the tools that we just built, but with the tools we're using internally for all of our processes. Is that correct?
Yeah. And this is really, really huge, right? What we find is that we get this question a lot from executives or data scientist teams or CTO teams, and it's who should own AI governance? And the reality is, Ryan, it should really be a shared responsibility model, because the reason why I say that is the security team, they already are focused on the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And they already have a lot of systems and existing tools they're using. So those are the pros of why they should be sort of the gatekeepers. But their inherent risk aversion may slow down the deployment of AI in the enterprise, and could be a misprioritization in terms of how fast the business wants to lead it. Other teams that want to be involved would be like legal and compliance, right? They're adept at complex like regulatory landscape, legal laws, and policy, but they're less technical and can be even more risk averse than the security teams. Then you have the privacy team that is able to align with the various privacy laws, GDPR being the most common one, CCPA in California being another. While this instills customer trust, this could also lead to design impacts that could exceed the business's risk appetite, and so that could sort of hamper you a little bit as well. And then lastly, you sort of have the engineering team, which is like the data science, the AI, and the office of the CTO. They're really technically fluent for understanding all the capabilities and limitations of sort of the AI systems they're deploying, but their knowledge about security and compliance and privacy and overall business focus and the outcomes of the business might be a con in terms of why you might not want them to lead. So ultimately, from a governance perspective, security is really going to play the lead on this from a governance stance, but it's going to be a shared responsibility among the various teams that you have in the organization. I laid out 4, but every organization is different, so you might have different teams that are coming together that are making new, different, novel tools. So it's going to require a dedicated AI governance team, and what we've done is set up an AI committee or a subcommittee and have them run it together. And by having a pre-existing department own AI governance that may not necessarily address any of these problems, but it can help streamline the bureaucracy of the inherent, biases internally to the team by having more of a cross-functional committee. So I think taking that approach to having a cross-collaboration approach is going to be much better in the long run, rather than having a siloed approach that generally gets taken when these projects or business initiatives get spawned.
Yeah. Yeah, man. The exposure to, risk and the exposure to liability is so great. It's
Yeah.
it makes it's enough to give pause, because it's like there's starting to be ideas that can be enacted that in, we'll say like Minority Report type ideas, where we're pulling things into different applications. What used to be just a Zapier on the back end connecting to APIs could now be like visually implemented by just watching what's happening on the screen to make predictive actions and like all this kind of stuff. That it's, that as these ideas come to life, the tendency is going to be for teams to just kind of skip over governance and compliance, because it slows you down. Like you said, now you have a committee and you have multiple committees, and the committees have agendas and they have meetings, and, so everything slows down. So, if you're, and like the big kind of thing now is like, okay, who's going to be the first 4-person unicorn? That's got a team of 4 that's absolutely killing it, and they can manage everything with their agents. Do you think founders, creators should pause and like say like, look, man, there's incredible opportunity for liability, probably both financially and maybe criminally, depending on like the severity. And where I'm concerned isn't the intention behind it. Rather, it's just like, clumsily breaking something that's like catastrophic,
Yeah. This is such a good question, because businesses want to run fast. They want to go to market first, but they know that they have to do this stuff securely. And a lot of times the security elements are sort of looked at as a secondary issue, and they're bolted on after the fact. But I can tell you, man, like that is such a non-wise decision to make, because the fines and the breach assessments that could be put against the company could be dire, and it could essentially make the business go out of business. And so I think having the proactive guardrails and the governance and the protections in place only helps strengthen the company, right? And so the business really needs to understand, what is the return on investment that I'm going to get from implementing a tool or a program or building my own in-house software model or AI agent, right? And that's really where the analysis and calculation needs to come in to make sure it's a viable endeavor to start with in the first place. All I can say is I've seen this happen time and time again, where companies build something, they don't think about the security concerns, and then they get breached, and now they're having to pay $1 million or $100 million or $1 billion fine, and that's really crushing their company, bottom line. Why would you do that if you could curb that in the butt by having all the proactive protections in place? You might pay a little bit of an arm and a leg for it initially, but you're saving maybe a 10x fine that could be assessed against you after the fact because you didn't take the precautions in the first place.
Speaking the truth, Peter, it's amazing. I got to get out of here, but I want to make sure that we talk about your company, Optimo IT. Tell us a little bit about who your ideal customers are and when they should come seek out your services.
Awesome. Yeah, ideal customer right now is really any SMB or startups. So we're really helping startups that are under 50 people, under 100 people. They're looking to use their AI tools. They're looking to use their proprietary data. They're looking to build new novel tools. They need to get security in place. They don't have any policies. They don't have any security controls in place. They might want to get SOC 2, Type 2 certified, and they need help with their compliance and audit journey. We help with all of that, right? We can help we can write the policies. We can build in the security controls into the tools, and then we can get you certified via the authorities, whether that's SOC 2, HIPAA, High Trust, NIST, ISO. We can do all of it for you to make sure that you're going to be looked at as a competitive advantage. And we're going to start with really doing a risk assessment to understand how are you using these tools, what is your inherent security posture, how can we make it better, and then how can we get you certified so that you can have that competitive advantage for the prospects that you're seeking. But most of the companies that I currently work with are technology focused or health tech focused. So these are small mom and pop shops or, as I said, startups at about 150 people.
Amazing. And we can find the company at optimo.io, or I'm sorry, optimoit.io.
Yes, sir.
And where can people find you online?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Peter Holcomb. I am on there. I'm all, my Optimal IT company is also represented on there. Yeah, that's probably the best way to communicate with me. Otherwise, you can certainly reach me through my website.
Amazing. All right, Peter, this has been great. I'm so glad we could do part 2. Maybe we'll do part 3 when some terrible breach happens. You can come break it down for us.
I would love to.
Cool. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you.
So let's talk about podcasts for a second. You're listening to one, which is awesome, by the way. Thank you so much. But have you ever thought about being a guest on a podcast? Like seriously, imagine sharing your story and your expertise and your business all on shows where your ideal customers are already listening. Kitcaster connects founders and entrepreneurs, professionals, with podcasts that actually make sense for their brand. No pitching, no guessing, you just have great conversations on great shows. And the best part, Kitcaster handles everything. You just show up and bring your A game, Kitcaster does the rest. This is hands down one of the easiest ways to grow your personal brand and just create a wellspring of content for short video, for blog posts, for speaking engagements, for whatever. So if you've been thinking, yeah, I really need to step up my content game, go to kitcaster.com and apply today. Now back to the show.